You're listening to the Fitness Rants Podcast, the show where unfiltered conversations meet real-world health and fitness.
We cut through the noise and deep dive into the truth behind health, nutrition, physique development, and the fitness industry itself.
We're your hosts, Ross Gilmore and Malin Blumdahl, experienced coaches and educators who have been part of the fitness industry for over 15 years.
If you're a coach, high performer, or someone just tired of mainstream nonsense, you're in the right place.
Now let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of Fitness Rants. So today we're going to talk about a topic that we feel quite strongly about, and it's something that we would talk about almost on a weekly basis, just off the cuff, I think, which is what are the most common training mistakes that we keep coming across time and time again, not only with clients, but what we see sort of out there in the fitness sphere, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, I mean, first and foremost, let's just start right off the top. We've sort of identified, and we've got no particular order here, but like 4 to 5 key mistakes that we would probably see most often, which is going to be, first and foremost, not having a plan or structure.
I think also first, before we can get into that, in the context of what? Like, I think what's the role of the training first and foremost?
Well, ultimately, the training is there to create an adaptation. I think the false premise that many people often have with their training is that they go into it potentially with the mindset of, well, this is here purely to expend energy, to burn calories. Certainly for our context as body composition coaches, is the training is there to create an adaptation, and that adaptation for the most part is going to be strength and building muscle tissue to change the way that your physique looks. So I think that's just the first, like you say, almost disclaimer preface to set is we're using training to build muscle. If you're looking at resistance training as, right, this is going to help me become a metabolic furnace, well, first of all, the impact of muscle tissue on your resting metabolic rate, that's going to take a long time for that to have a additional tangible effect on your caloric expenditure. But rather than seeing it as, and if we were to look at it, steady state cardio or cardiovascular training is going to be more efficient at burning calories than resistance training is. So if burning calories was actually your goal, you're better doing a lot of cardio. The problem with that is that it's not very good for your physique to just do cardio only. So let's just get that out of the way first and foremost.
I think that's important because that's a lens that we're answering these questions with, or like discussing these mistakes,
these points
through. It's in the context of that adaptation and the reason for strength training and changing your body.
Exactly. So back to that first point, not having a structured plan. I think first and foremost, we don't only just see this with individuals going into the gym, trainees going into the gym. They've joined the local gym and they're going in there, and it's almost just like a bit of a tour of the machines to go around. What's available? Oh, just jump on, do 2 sets, 3 sets, 4 sets of 10 to 15 or 8 to 12, whatever it is, and just go along about their day. But the problem is, it isn't just the trainees, is it? If you actually look at most personal trainers with their clients, there is no plan. It's very much off the cuff. Just, okay, well, today we're going to train this. And I've had...
It's back day.
It's
leg day. Let's just do legs.
It's like the typical bodybuilding bro split for a gym pop client who's only training with you 2-3 days a week. And it's just really that's where we are. But unfortunately, this is more common than it is not. So for example, let's see a trainer who has structured program, periodized, they've got the logbook, they're tracking that progression with the client, they're noting down any issues the client is facing, what the client's limitations might be is factored into the program, any potentially past injuries.
Feeling on the day,
exactly.
the day. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, the thing is a structured training program isn't just for individuals going to the gym themselves. It's also something that unfortunately is sorely lacking from trainers training their clients as well. But if we're going to talk about why that's an issue, well, why is it an issue? But what is it about not having a structured training plan? What's going to be the detriment of that? Well, first things first, you're not going to have any sense of how much progression you're actually making over time. Now, you'll have heard battered around social media the term progressive overload, and I actually prefer to use the term progressive overstimulus. Reason why is that load is only one component of lifting, resistance training, and we're not getting to the whole technicalities. Maybe this is for another episode of the whole torque and moment arm thing, but let's just assume that load is just a part of the equation, and it's really how you contract against that load that actually makes the big difference. But if we are going to quote unquote progressively overload or progressively overstimulus, then we need to know exactly if that's actually occurring or not. The only way we know that is keeping a note of the weights you're lifting and the reps you're performing, and whether that was done to failure consistently, and if technique was standardized throughout that time as well. Now, without a structured training program and a logbook to go with that, really, if you're not measuring, you're just guessing. Now, the other problem is that you'll see is that people do either themselves or with a trainer who isn't professional, isn't organized, is it's very much just off the cuff training. And I don't know if this whole myth of shocking the body is still exists, and that's maybe part of the rationale, but I think honestly it's just intellectual laziness. There's no thought process or plan. It's just, I'm going to let the person turn up and I'm just going to throw them into whatever I feel like on the day. But let's just assume maybe you're an individual listening to this who hasn't got a trainer. You're trying to just find the best possible information of how can I go about this in a intelligent and sort of cerebral way. Well, first things first, ideally you want to hire a coach. Shameless plug. But if you're not able to hire a coach, do a bit of research online, especially nowadays with the use of AI. You could probably do a pretty good job of going in and just getting a structured 2-3 day full body program and ask it to write well for, and just prompt it in like, my goals are X, Y, and Z, and I have this many days to train and I have this much time to train. You could easily figure out very quickly, okay, here's a 2 or 3 day full body routine, and then keep a logbook, whether it's old school, which is like actually paper and pen and a notepad, or whether you use like an app on your phone or whatever it is. Keep track of what you're lifting and try to either progress in terms of reps or load, or both if you're having a particularly good week. But you're doing one of those two things progressively over time. And that's ultimately going to solve that bigger issue. But if you don't have a structured plan, and what we've seen often, and we've seen this with many clients over the years who were trying it on their own for a period of time, is they're going in and they're lifting the same weights for the same number of reps. Maybe they're doing the same exercises, which is better than some people, but they're just not doing anything to force progression.
Because that's the thing. Like I get that with my clients a lot. Obviously, I just work with women. Like they have a program, but just having a program also isn't the solution. Like just having a program and doing the same stuff. Like you actually need to push yourself to progress. Like it's not going to happen automatically. And this is not a big problem, but it's a big like theme I see sometimes from my clients. But this weight still feels so heavy. Like the 6s still feel so heavy. So how am I going to do the 8s? Well, you're just going to have to do them. If you've done the 6s for your rep range, then they're not going to feel, your 6s aren't going to feel lighter until you've done the 8s. So you have to like push for progress. So yeah, have a program and then sort of force progression. That is what progressive overload is. You get stronger by doing more reps, more weights, so
100%. I think and this is sort of touching on the bodybuilding realm, but JP, trained by JP, or Jordan Piers, he was almost famously quoted as saying, if you genuinely want to get stronger over time, you have to learn every once in a while to touch new weight. And that sort of speaks to your point, is that, okay, you might feel like the 6s, like give the example you gave, are still heavy for a shoulder press. But exactly to your point, until you've at least felt what the 8s look like, you don't have a reference point. And what you'll actually find is that just by exposing yourself gradually to that, even if you can't manage the number of reps you were intending to have in the first place, at least now your nervous system, your brain is like, okay, well, this is a challenge that I'm not able yet to overcome.
And it also makes it more exciting and more interesting. So this is also something I hear a lot from the women I work with. Well, it's just like boring, or they get bored with strength training, resistance training. And part of that comes from, first of all, not having a plan, but I think also like you're not, like when you get more intellectually involved with the process and you see yourself getting stronger, that itself is motivating.
Yeah. 100%.
So I've had that with several of my female clients. I used to just feel really intimidated, or like just don't enjoy strength training. But once they actually understand what the goal of the training is, and they feel more confident with their execution and training and performance and these things, then they actually get excited about it. It's like this feels really good. I'm getting stronger, and and that itself then, I guess, that's what I'm looking for, reinforces that behavior, and it makes it easier to stay consistent as well, because you're now intellectually involved with the process and you see yourself progressing. So
I mean, I almost unintentionally, you sort of, in that sort of whole passage of speaking there, you've almost outlined 3 of the other common mistakes that people make. So let's start with number 1.
And
the first one
I was going to say, it's setting little mini goals. Like when you have little mini goals to things, whether it's I'm going to do the next weight, or that itself makes it more exciting than just sort of going in and just doing the same stuff and just sort of winging it.
Which exactly brings us to the next mistake that people make, which is program hopping. Sometimes people will start with a program, they'll maybe manage to do 4 weeks, 6 weeks, And how often have we both had this from
When is the time
clients
to change the program? After 2 weeks.
after 4 weeks, 6 weeks? And I would even say that if you're at the 8-week mark and you're already asking that, it's like, well, we're like, first of all, the first 2 to 4 weeks of any training program, you have to almost see it as a skill acquisition phase. It takes time for your brain to lay down the neural motor patterns to be proficient at that movement.
To learn how to train properly and the movements. And
so the reality is that if you're talking about extracting progress out of each movement that you do, especially the bigger movements, if you've got, like, say we call them the sort of hallmark movements, or the movements that you're sort of indexing as, right, these are going to give us a pretty good idea that we're actually progressing, getting strong over time. So think of your, your squats, your hinges, your pushes, your pulls, like your big compound movements. If they're progressing over time, that's going to give you a pretty good idea that things are moving
stronger.
Yeah, that things are moving where they're meant to. But what ends up happening is that people get to literally 4 weeks. Your body is only at a stage where it's like, right now, I'm ready to be able to start pushing because I'm proficient in this movement. And then you change the program. So now
you have to relearn it, and the order may be different, and then it affects you differently, Yeah.
So realistically, it's only after like that 2 to 4 week window where, right, I'm actually starting to extract some form of benefit from this. Then from there, the question we often get is, well, how long should I follow a training program? How often should I change my plan? Well, ideally, assuming that you've got the mental capacity to do so, and of course, if you're working with a coach, they'll sort of support you through this, is you run those exercises. So I try to get my clients to think of it less as a program and think of each exercise as its own progression. You keep an exercise in a program for as long as you're seeing a tangible result from it. You're making progress. And then this was a rule that actually I learned from Cal years ago when I started working with them, which was you implement the 3 strike rule.
Yeah.
You give an exercise 3 weeks, and if after the 3rd week you've still hit a stall, a plateau, you're no longer making progress in terms of reps or load, or you've had 3 weeks in a row of trying to do that and your form is breaking down as a result, it's time to reconsider. It's time to potentially swap the exercise out or make a change. So I think that's the first thing, is you want to make sure that you're progressing exercises rather than thinking, right, now that I'm getting bored or that, that I'm starting to struggle with certain movements, I just have to overhaul the whole program. Just to give an example on that, I literally, before I did my last prep, I followed the same training program for around 15 months. Now I tell people that and they're like, what do you mean, like 15 months? Like, yeah, like, and don't get me wrong, if we look at some of the exercises that were maybe smaller muscle groups or single joint movements, for example, of course, they're going to have much less runway for progression than your bigger multi-joint compound lifts.
So the meat and potatoes of your program, like the
RDLs, hack squats, they were able to be progressed.
As long as you're progressing,
there's no point in taking it out.
I usually run a program for about, I would say probably on average, like 24 weeks at least. 20 to 24 weeks. And then even if my first change to that program, and I'm working with a coach right now, usually what we do is that when we first tweak it, it's just tweaking some of the stuff. It's still following the same structure, the same split and things like that, but just which movements am I maybe stalling on, and we need to make some adjustments and stuff like that. But I love and I hate changing a program, because I feel like almost in a way when I'm changing a program, I have to take those initial 4 weeks to just find my baselines and to get a feel. Like it's nice because it's new, but at the same time, it takes a little bit of time until I start feeling like I'm actually progressing with it. But once I've ran with a program for a month or 2 months, then I feel like now I'm really milking this program. Now it's really doing what it's meant to do. So changing it every month or every 2 months, like that's just, you would just be spinning your wheels.
Which is exactly what clients end up doing half the time, right? So a question I often pose to them, the ones that come after like 8 weeks, 12 weeks and like, oh, I'm bored now. And the first question I'll ask is, well, what's more important to you, entertainment or results?
Yeah, why are you bored? Like, are you actually, because it can also be a little bit of a alarm bell there as a coach. Okay, are you actually progressing, or what's going on there? Like, why are you bored? Like, what's going on?
And that's exactly right, because that is like, that's an indicator too. It's like, okay, well, if they're getting bored, there's one of two things happening. No one gets bored of something that they're seeing results from.
Yeah.
2, that they feel confident in their competence about doing.
Yeah.
And 3, that they can actually see, well, I'm actually getting really good at this and I'm progressing, I'm getting stronger. So sometimes when clients say I'm bored, that's actually a bit of a red flag, that it's like, well, they've hit a plateau and they're just not maybe progressing, or they're just not feeling the movement. They're maybe not getting it. Something has to be addressed in terms of execution or technique, which actually brings us to our next 2 common mistakes that we often see within people's training, which is, first of all, is effort. Now, the reason why I'm starting with effort is that you can get away with a hell of a lot, assuming that you're not doing anything stupid to cause injury. You can get away with form not being 100%. If you push hard enough and you're taking your sets close enough to failure, you will see progress. Now, on the flip side of that, the problem is, and you see this in the sort of rhetoric in the traditionalist bodybuilding rhetoric, is that, oh, well, it's just train hard, bro, just push hard, and it's just all about effort. Okay, well, that's true to a point.
What cost?
But at what cost? And this is where I think, one of the things we really teach with RTS is that, well, if you only looked at it from a pure building muscle perspective, sure, like effort is going to be a big component of it. But two questions that I then pose to those individuals is, one, what happens when you're no longer making progress? What happens when what was working is no longer working? The second question is then, well, you may not be able to see that inside view of what's happening at the level of the joint, but we have to appreciate that our joints are going through wear and tear throughout our lifetime, and especially throughout our training lifetime. And it might not be, if you're training with really poor form, maybe even really dangerous, reckless form, or you have no regard for your joint health whatsoever, or even minimal regard, let's say, or even you're just unaware of it, you might not see it after a week, a month, maybe not even a year or a couple of years. But when you get 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years down the line, this is where these type of things will really start to show. And so I think when you speak to people,
you don't want to just be able to train in your 30s. Like I want to be strong and train into my 80s if I live that long, you know what I mean? So you have to think more long term when it comes to like joint health and injury management and prevention and things like that. So
exactly. So it's that.
This is maybe not the problem I see with my woman in terms of, this is maybe more your audience and your like.
Yeah, a bit more hardcore. Sort of. Again, they're a bit more intermediate advanced. Either they're in, training for physique goals like bodybuilding or photo shoots.
For me, it's more the issue of they're not strength training. They're doing cardio training.
Or cardio weights.
Cardio weights. It's like, your bar race, your group classes. And well, I do weight training. I do body pump, or I do, do dumbbells. But it's just, it is literally, you're not going to get the stimulus that you need to build muscle. And if you're not building muscle, then you're not changing your body shape.
Yeah, and just to be clear on that, we're not, by any stretch of the imagination, because I train and coach many group exercise instructors, we're not shitting on group exercise. We're not saying that it doesn't have a place in the fitness industry. In fact, it's an incredible place for so many people who maybe feel intimidated by commercial gyms to turn up in a community environment that's fun, entertaining, and it gets them moving and exercising. But if we're going to really talk about the context of you are serious about changing your physique, that isn't going to cut it. I'm sorry, but it's just not. And what you'll find is that many people say, but I see this person go to Barry's and they've got a great physique. It's like, well, the chances are, the grand majority of cases, there's always exceptions, but the grand majority of cases, they've built their physique away from that. And then they're just now maintaining their physique and they just want to do things that's fun. They want to just do stuff that fills a different cup, so to speak. So
you need structure. Like, it's lacking structure, these group programs. That's the issue as well. So to change your physique, to change your body, like, you need structure, a program, progression, repetition.
Exactly. And just coming back to that, the point of effort versus execution, because let's be honest, often there's a bit of a divisive camp mentality where it's like, either no, your technique has to be so crystal clean to the point where you almost just like, you're not training hard enough because you're just so concerned about every single inch of every single rep being absolutely perfect. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for proper execution. At the end of the day, I'm an educator for RTS Global, and we're massive on obviously proper exercise mechanics. But I think people conflate or confuse the idea that exercise mechanics means like soft training or just like training with like no intensity.
Just the dumbbells.
and that's really not what we're getting at all. In fact, the way I train is that I'm very much, effort is a huge component of how I train, and it's also,
it doesn't have to be at the cost of execution.
That's what I was going to get to the words of my mouth. So when it comes to my clients, what I help them to establish, and I really take pride in doing this in my own training as well, is it's finding that perfect marriage between laser-like execution but brutal effort. And when you're able to marry those two things together, this is where I've seen clients who have maybe not seen much results in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Over the course of 6 months to a year, they make massive changes with their physique because they were maybe someone who was almost either on one spectrum or the other. They were so cautious about technique where they weren't training hard enough, not taking their sets to failure. But then maybe they're on the other end where they're absolutely battering and flogging themselves every week, every session. But the execution was just way off or just not there. Junk volume, etc. So this is where, coming back to the first thing, having a structured training program and then combining that with proper execution, which realistically the training program means nothing if biomechanics and execution isn't there, but then the effort's got to be there alongside it.
Yeah. And how often have you heard, like, oh, we've trained, I wish I knew this sooner, or I've trained wrong my whole life. Oh, wow, this is how my lat feels like. How often do you not hear that from, your clients, and sometimes clients who have trained for many, many years.
But in many cases, I've had clients that have trained for 8 years, 10 years plus, and then they're feeling a muscle work really effectively for the first time in, well, potentially ever sometimes. And it's not an ego stroke for us. And I think people often worry about, well, is that what biomechanics is? It's just a way of marketing. It's just a way of tickling your own ego. And I've heard people being accused of that, like, oh, well, you only focus on this stuff because it makes you feel like you're doing something important. It's like, well, that's fine. If you've never had any issues with your training, you feel your muscles working correctly, you've not experienced any injuries yet, you may not understand the value of proper mechanics.
Yeah.
But then when you're in a position like us, where you're a trainer, you've went from zero working with all types of clients, and sure, we're in a position where we might work with a certain type of person now, but my belief is that coaches, we're ultimately problem solvers. And so when you're in a position where you have to keep solving problems, especially when you work with people in person, it's why my belief is that most online coaches should not be online coaches unless they've had time with people in person, because you don't learn how to solve these problems with people's training unless you've had that in-person experience. So really then what it comes back to is, okay, well, we've got this person over here who has never learned how to train a muscle, or the implications that certain joints have on certain muscle groups. But then on the other end, I've equally had as many people come in where they're like, I train to failure. And then we go through some sets of some exercises of their lagging body parts, and they're like 3, 4, 5 reps off. And oh yeah, that's it, it's done. It's like, but that's not failure, is it not? And I'm not joking. This is trainers I've trained that have spoke this as well. So I think this is one thing, is that people are often not training as accurate as they think they are. And in many, many cases, they're often not training as hard as they think they are. So that's probably a good time to segue into a final mistake that we see. And this is maybe a bit more relevant to your population or the general population, which is the idea of training to burn calories instead of training to get a response. We did touch it, I suppose, at the start of the adaptation thing, but it's just to elaborate that in a bit more. What do we mean by that? Like getting into training to burn versus training to build.
Yeah, I think, just because a workout feels hard, or you're sweating, or you're breathing heavy, or it burns, like you're feeling fatigue, doesn't necessarily mean that it's effective for the goal that you have at hand. Like, right, I want to build muscle, I want to tone up, I want to, look like I have some shape after I've lost the body fat. Like, that's fatigue or sweat or calories is not a good measure of that, or a workout that is effective for that goal. Again, coming back to, for that to happen, then you need to have structure, and you need to focus on things like progressive overload, and that's never going to really be met adequately in a group class sort of setting.
Or even if their training is set up in a way where it isn't really driving progressive overload. And I don't blame the consumer 1000% on this, or 100%. It's marketing has been very, very divisive in the fitness industry. It's been very sort of like strategic in that, okay, well, we're going to do this. Like, if you just look at like your favorite influencer or many influencers, you look at the internet and YouTube, people look up fat loss workouts. And so people
there's a difference between fat loss workouts
and muscle building workouts, and
the program is the same.
And that's one of the biggest false narratives. But the problem is that sometimes it's not the same. Sometimes it's right, here's this fat loss workout, and it's essentially resistance training but put into a circuit format. It's done with and what ends up happening is they're doing a lot of volume. We talked about jump volume, but none of the exercises are being performed at anything close to the intensity that's actually going to make tangible changes. So I don't blame the consumer entirely. I think fitness marketing has had a lot to do with this idea of there being such a thing as a fat burning workout. And so one of the quotes that I'll often use with my clients when it comes to thinking about training as a whole, when it comes to body composition, is think of your training more as what builds muscle keeps muscle. So how you train in a building phase or to build muscle is also how you train in a fat loss phase. Now, there are, of course, going to be nuances of things that you might tweak or change when you're building muscle, and things you might do when you're in the business end of a fat loss phase.
And you also have the biggest difference as well is like when you're in a fat loss phase, assuming you need to be in a deficit to lose body fat, and you've got limited resources already. So, that may mean that you should still strength train, but if anything, you might need to account for a bit more rest time, or drop your sets down from doing, maybe 3-4 sets to 2 or 3 sets, or you need to be a bit more mindful. You can still, the goal is, as you said, okay, we want to maintain the muscle. The focus isn't there on building muscle, even though that is possible depending on your training experience and things like that. But it's not like, all right, I want to lose body fat now, so I'm going to go on this diet and I'm going to do these fat loss workouts. If anything, that can sometimes make it worse, especially if it's really calorie expensive workouts that you do and you may not have the resources for that.
Not only that,
And
it ramps up your hunger as well in many
and
cases.
this may ramp up your hunger, and it ramps up your fatigue, and then it ramps up your cravings, and then shit, I can't stick my diet because I'm so fatigued and exhausted because of the very expensive training that you do. Versus if you just focus on, your 3 to 4 strength training sessions, and you can moderate the volume and the intensity a bit based on how you feel.
Essentially
more likely to stick to it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also looking, if you think about the types of cardio workouts that was being popularized for ages, it was like, right, when you're in a fat loss phase, you should do HIIT training. The problem is that if you look at what HIIT training is, proper HIIT training, and when I say HIIT training, by the way, again, we're not talking about Barry's F45, Orange Theory, because these would actually be more considered moderate intensity.
Yeah.
If you look at proper HIIT, we're talking about working like with your resistance training. If you were doing powerlifting, we're talking about maximal efforts. We're talking about like 85, 90% upwards of your max effort in terms of energy systems. And so that means things like actual sprinting. It means like 20 seconds all out, for example, on an assault bike, followed by at least a couple of minutes rest. So that's proper HIIT training. But let's just say even you're doing moderate intensity intervals, just to be kind. That is directly competing with your energy and recovery resources that your resistance training also requires as well. So this is why we'll often explain to clients, like, listen, we don't want you doing tons of that stuff. You might be able to get away with a little bit at the start of a fat loss phase, but the deeper you get into the business end, there's a reason why, coming back to your point about the number of sets, there's a reason why we may reduce volume, but encourage you to maintain strength towards the end of a fat loss phase. Again, what builds muscle keeps it, but we just have to maybe reallocate volume or reduce volume to accommodate that.
I like the least mode approach, if anything.
Luke Lehman, muscle nerds.
Start with less, and then like the minimum effective dose. Track data, as always, 3-4 weeks, what's happening. If you're losing body fat, your energy is good, you're feeling good, you're not overly sore, like everything is in a good spot, you don't necessarily need to do more for the sake of doing more. Yeah. But if things are starting to maybe plateau a little bit, or the rate of loss is slowing down, okay, cool, now let's bring in, let's bring in some cardio, or do you want to do maybe a group class if you're enjoying that. Like we can sprinkle that in, keeping your nutrition constant. And again, observe the data. What's happening? Are we seeing things move a little bit quicker? In some cases, it might be, keep the activity the same, but adjust the nutrition. But start with less, and then we can always add in things. But if you start doing everything and then you're bust after 4 weeks, you have nowhere to go.
Yeah, exactly.
And you just feel like you're just going to feel defeated. I'm done all of these things and I just feel horrible. And then, so start less and then rather layer things on top. In most cases, the least mode approach, you can sort of run with that almost throughout, at least for like a lifestyle client. Like in my last diet, and I got, fairly lean, I didn't do any cardio. I didn't really do hundreds of steps. Like I did walk, and I was a bit more aware of my expenditure, but I just stuck to the exact same calories, the exact same training, and I felt really good. Yeah. Like energy, sleep, my cycle. I was really healthy and felt great through the diet. So I had no issues sticking to it. But if I'd gone out like too hard off the gates, I wouldn't have been able to do it for that time. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think if you were to look at that, and let's just say we take some practical examples of how that might look like in practice with the training. We're looking at, let's just say, for example, you're in maintenance. You've figured out maybe what your minimum effective volume is. So we've went that least mode approach, to beast mode, as Luke Lehman would call it. And we've figured out that, okay, this is the number of sets you do for each of these muscle groups across time. Then what you might do is over time, before you add an additional set, you might look at intensifiers, they're often called, right? So you're looking at things like drop sets, rest pause, but you find ways of really pushing progression. Then maybe after an amount of time, you might add an additional set to certain movements. Where that might transition then going into a fat loss phase is that you pull back down to baseline, that minimum effective volume. And then as you get towards the end of a dieting phase, this is where you might reduce the number of sets. But certainly one thing I do with clients moving into a dieting phase is any intensifiers we had in place, like drop sets, rest pauses, those come out. Yeah. And so this is where, if you are going to talk about, that's the closest you're going to get to this idea of fat burn training or like fat loss training versus building. The only thing that's going to change is not the actual training itself, but just potentially maybe the proximity to failure, maybe the amount of volume you're going to do it, and maybe how many failure points you're asking an individual to take. Like you said, it's going to really be based on what resources do they have available for the given phase that they're in.
So let's summarize then just what are the mistakes, because we've been going down different, but just to sort of focus on not having a program.
That's it. Not having structure.
Yeah.
Not training hard enough.
changing the program too often.
Yeah. Not
program hopping.
Yeah, program hopping, not training hard enough, and then almost tied with that is not training with proper accuracy or technique. And then last but not least is going to be training in a way to, as if you're trying to use it to burn calories or burn energy rather than training to build muscle and get stronger.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Fitness Rants podcast.
If you got value from this conversation, be sure to hit subscribe on either YouTube or your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss any of our weekly rants.
Oh, and if you're feeling generous, we would really appreciate it if you would drop us a 5-star rating or a review, because it would help more listeners like you to find the show.
If you haven't already, be sure to connect with us on Instagram. We'll leave our handles in the episode description.
Thanks for tuning in. We look forward to having you back for our next episode.